as per the status, like gap between the rich and the poor is by 8-fold higher. So which was quite alarming, and we thought that we have to do something.
I tend to try to follow Bhutan on a regular basis as head of global economic monitoring at the UN, but also out of personal interest in Bhutan.
On one hand, we are faced with high unemployment challenges, especially among the youth, and other hand,
I would like to share some of the aspirations of our youth and my views on how we as an academia.
And when I say government is the ruling party, and then we have the bureaucrats, and then we have the private sector.
I think the inactiveness or the reactiveness comes from the fact that the government has been taking care of us historically. So even today, medical is paid for, education is paid for.
My question is actually, because I remember 10 years ago you also spoke in a similar forum and as well as wrote a paper, and that was in the context of the rupee crunch in Bhutan. And now here we are, 10 years later with the COVID impact. So what is the difference that you see during these two specific points in time? And what have we implemented upon your recommendation back then, or have we not implemented, and what has been the impact that you saw? I think it's always easier to look back rather than to look ahead at this point in time. So just those two comparisons, the literature of your paper and your talk, and here we are now. And I don't think a lot of the assessment that you've given now is very different from what you had given 10 years ago. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's a very good question, but there's no easy answer to it. We can spend a long time discussing what happened in the last 10 years. I tend to try to follow Bhutan on a regular basis as head of global economic monitoring at the UN, but also out of personal interest in Bhutan. What I've seen that the policy messages that were there 10 years ago, not much has changed. I sort of discussed, in 2011-12, the challenges for Bhutan in terms of a resource scarce, and that has actually materialized. If we look at it, Bhutan is more dependent on hydropower than it was in 2010-11, and that has actually affected Bhutan's full growth potential. So what I would say is that there needs to be some serious rethinking in the policy circle about that. How do we avoid further downward slide of the economy, further concentration of one sector? That is the challenge, that it would require some immediate sacrifice or trade-offs, because that would mean that even if it requires shedding 1 or 2% of growth rate, but investing in sectors that has more potential. For example, Bhutan has one of the lowest electricity tariff rate in the world. Per kilowatt hour, it is the lowest in the world. I've seen the tariff rates even in neighboring India or other countries in South Asia. It is a very, very priced at the lowest possible level. But that electricity should be harvested to right use, that could be used to generate new sectors of the economy. But I haven't seen this new sector's development in Bhutan. I've heard about IT sector or IT parks, but I haven't seen real. When I look at Bhutan's export of services, still is very limited. There's no IT exports from Bhutan. So that is something that Bhutan can think seriously about. How do we utilize other countries in the region or even beyond? They don't have electricity so cheap. And if Bhutan has the cheap electricity, although I will not say that crypto mining would be a good sector for Bhutan. Crypto has crashed globally, but the related sector, there are many sectors, blockchains and other technology that could be used, which is very energy intensive. So Bhutan has to think beyond hydropower. That would be and it hasn't thought about beyond hydropower as of during the last 10 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good morning, Hamid. Bhutan is slated to move into middle income category, I think next year or very soon. Just like to hear your views on this, the pros and cons, in the light of the current situation.
I think Bhutan is in the middle income country group already, and Bhutan is considering to graduate from LDC status. But these are thresholds that are, very fungible thresholds, meaning that if World Bank changes its, lending criteria, middle income country status is basically a lending criteria. Whether if it's a low income country, a country is eligible for what is known as IDA financing, concessional financing. When it becomes a middle income country, it loses that opportunity to borrow in concessional terms. It can borrow in blended terms, meaning that partly concessional, partly hybrid, and partly in market rates. So that's where it is very tricky for a country like Bhutan to join the group of middle income countries when it would face significantly higher borrowing cost if it has to borrow in dollar terms. But one good thing about Bhutan's external debt, almost all debt are in Indian rupee, which is pegged to Nultram. But if it has to borrow in dollars, then the middle income country status will affect its borrowing cost, and it will face significantly higher borrowing cost. Just to give an idea, low income countries on average, they borrow from the World Bank or other multilateral development banks at under 1%. The moment they become a middle income country, their borrowing rates increases to about 3.5%, 4%. And if you borrow from the international capital market, meaning that by issuing bonds and other instruments, then it can be 7, 8, 9% in dollar terms. So borrowing costs increase exponentially once a country becomes middle income country. But I think there's also a grace period in between. But as far as I know, Bhutan has not been borrowing from in US dollars in any significant amount. So that means it doesn't need to worry that much about the middle income status.
A very good morning. I'm Sri Nayan from Election Commission of Bhutan. Bhutan is a Kidu-ridden country, or is a welfare state. This is what I think. So how can we make, my question is to Mr. Gopal, how can we make Bhutan a workfare state rather than a welfare state?
Each one of us continue to depend on the state from every front. I think that notion not be prolonged in the longer term. When you talk of graduating to middle income country, and we are still dependent on the state for basic necessities, and that doesn't really fit well. And that is the problem, that the economic vulnerability index, we are not able to meet threshold of the graduation. That's the problem. This is a mirror inefficiencies in economic fundamentals. And although we have achieved in terms of per capita income and human asset index, and that's also, we have a lot of questions on this, on the human asset index. Thank you.
The speakers have mentioned hydropower being a major source of income for the country. Does the government also look at the long-term environmental impact of hydropower? I consider environment to be a long-term asset of the country. Are people and government aware of the impact of hydropower on the environment?
I think as a environmental, the friendly country, Bhutan is an environmental rich country. Everybody knows hydropower is the main endowment we have, natural endowment we have. I think that connects well with the sustainable economic management perspective. And we know that nature conservation is very important for us, because we depend on natural resources. And as you rightly mentioned in the question, that hydropower is not free from vulnerabilities. Like climate change has a lot of impact on the hydropower sector. If you lose our perennial, the river sources, our hydropower, a lot of huge investment that we have put in hydropower is going to suffer. And this might have a lot of implications on debt service repayment in the longer term if you are not able to make a repayment by that time. That's why now importance is, should we diversify our economy away from hydropower is the question. And we have to identify the sources of growth. That's the challenge we have.
Plus, Dasha and the panelists, I thought since my background is hydropower, so primarily for the benefit of the students, very valid concern in terms of the environment impact. But the most important thing is hydropower is the renewable energy which will be replacing the fossil fuel. Even in Bhutan, the way hydropower is developed is that there are no big dams, so it's all run of the river scheme. Okay, so there's no big dams to really have this major impact upstream. And the other thing is there's very strong Water Act which says that there should be minimum flow of 10% of the river. So I think, yes, these are valid concerns, but the contribution Bhutan is making to the regional and global energy, renewable energy source diversification, I think is huge. You cannot imagine. And then even in Bhutan, I'm sure Central from RMA, Mr. Gopal will agree, during COVID and pandemic, which is the majority, maximum contribution to the revenue is from hydropower. Okay, so hydropower has been COVID-proof. Hydropower has been, vulnerability in terms of climate change is a long-term impact. Yes, we need to be aware, but otherwise, this is market fluctuation-proof. We have a guaranteed market with India. I think there's no other project which you can pay back in 12 years, and then on all this billions and billions of term to government exchequer session we. So a very valid concern for my student friends, but I thought that is very important for me, having been in the hydropower sector earlier, to clarify this. Thank you. And then just a follow-up question with Mr. Gopal. One is the interesting component that during COVID, only Bhutan has registered negative 10% economic growth. So what are some of the things that has really made us special in terms of registering the highest negative growth?
I think we have to look from both endogenous and exogenous factors impacting the growth. If you look at these are the endogenous factors given by hydropower has been a cushion, because hydropower is a main driver of growth. And but other hand, if we are exposed to the exogenous sectors like tourism sector, industry, hotel, restaurant, the drag on that growth has been much more severe during this pandemic phase. That's the first shock of pandemic. The second shock was actually felt by the sectors like mining, construction, transport sector. Second shock of the pandemic. And tourism was initially, it was hit harder because of that, because sectors are not in isolation. I think we have to understand they are very closely linked. These sectors are linked. And now if pandemic hits trade, commerce, construction, but the good thing about us in our case is hydropower continue to remain resilient throughout the pandemic phase. That was the good thing for us to maintain our contractions within the negative 10% on energy. But in terms of unemployment, because again this is one of the paradox, we call it a paradox, is the Bhutan's growth paradox. We have high growth driven by hydropower, still unemployment rate is very high, and hydropower is a capital intensive industry, and like service sector suffered in terms of employment. Many layoff, industries shut down, and this is again the question comes of diversification. Should we go for a diversification? This is very important during this shock phase. We call it an internal shock phase or external shock phase. This time pandemic happens to be external shock.
I'm Karma Gilson, representing from Neutral House from National Council. And then I just want to put up this question to Mr. Gopal Giri. If every government comes on and then there is a reduction in tax, what will be there in our economic impact?
I think this is very important because same question I'll ask Nanagi Chimgi Amna Tirumavachin Nachigi Zasanglo Kadebe ne Ponimaga. This is the question, same question. You can think that the Minister of Finance is a Nangyam. Nangyam Natiru Mabachin, everybody will suffer. The fiscal space we call. They have a very limited money to spend in the economy. Basically for the economic development purpose. Tax waiver, tax deferral, and all these is eat away the revenue base of the country. And if revenue base is not there, we will not be able to do the development activities. That is the immediate impact on the economy. The other question I was, role of central banking in fighting pandemic. I think most of the countries did. Increase the balance sheet of the bank. That was one of the easiest options. Increase the balance sheet of the bank, inflate the ballooning effect, because it's within the control, within the domestic control, you need to borrow externally, and no exchange rate risks. But Japan has been doing this. Most of the the advanced countries has been doing this. Fed used to do this, quantitative easing and all the different phases. But Bhutan is again uniquely put. Again, talking from the exchange rate front, if you play with a balance sheet, this is going to hit our balance sheet back. Steel ki wall dacha to ngachi case na. Dacha rokti ngachi lura one me bala. And that's why we have to very calibrate. If you increase the balance sheet, government will spend. Spending means import will increase. Import increase, your hit your reserve. Balance of payment will deteriorate. We are very careful in this.
Also for Gopal, there's one more question here. I'll give you time to think about it. It says, elsewhere in other countries, when the economies contracts, government, central bank play an important coordinated role. Important role in coordination, I think is meant, bringing fiscal monetary policies. This is not happening in Bhutan. Why? So you have a third question there. Maybe we'll ask MP Kinle to give the first quick answer, because Gopal has a little longer. Please be brief and give you some time to think about the three questions.
So being a non-economist, by the way, I will not be able to give the details and the depth of the financial matters. But as far as policy is concerned, with regard to private sector development and entrepreneurial scopes, I think NCGS program from the government has played a vital role. We have also been focusing pretty strongly on CSI Bank. From NCGS and CSI jointly, I think there are many youths and who aspire to do business have been given, and who have also been taking up businesses have also been given opportunities to access to loan, and they have been doing a fantastic job. There are certain glitches, as they're used to have glitches with have been having glitches with other banks as well. But I think as far as NCGS and CSIs are concerned, I think we could really address entrepreneurial wishes, whims to do businesses in our country. I think this is one way to actually make it inclusive and directly cater to the needs and aspirations of doing businesses in Bhutan. And I think this is one way to close the gap. Thank you.
The question is, because the government sets or creates the policy environment for all sectors, if we are to experience inclusive growth, what policy reforms are important? What is being done so that the other sectors share the responsibility as well as enjoy the inclusive growth? A few words from you on this.
Not only the water flagship programs, we also have been focusing so much on land development. This is also for the youth entrepreneurial and engagement program, because there are many, this morning I was rushing from Ongdi, and then I attended, day before I attended another program. FMCL has taken up huge land development program, in addition to what government has already initiated. And these are to ensure that youth could take up agriculture. Bhutan is driven by agroeconomics, and we have learned that if Bhutan work hard, if we work hard, we could meet food sufficiency, which has remained as a myth as of now. So for that matter, our plans and policies are shifting towards a self-sufficiency economy, as well to create a diversified market, not only within our country, but also outside. But then pandemic has been the kink and bottleneck to government's policies, but I think eventually we will be able to address the normal. Thank you.
데이터 나부도 저기 삼철보 같이 가슴지 데이터 산이 준딩 루 떼브지 배워진 데 가슴지 같이 차슈스베 가서 이게 데이터 안좀지 슈도 쓰주니
Lasso Karinchil.
When you talk of the theme, inequalities and inclusiveness, sometimes we forget what is the strength of the social capital. Sometimes social capital itself is a very important factor that we need to understand. Community will have their own strength to do things. Local government what they can do, what they cannot do. I think they can be a helping hand. The government can provide them. Those who like a carrot and stick policy, they might do, some may not do. Within their endowment. Like we are exactly talking from the impact investment front. It's a part of financial inclusion initiative. Impact investment. Impact investment basically says that how we can mobilize the social capital within the community that has a social impact. And community will be more.
Thank you, Gopal. Rasul. Machigani Darigi discussion and message Kachetuchani Tendable, Kenku the Galupo, so the Dugitan Datasinzi Yarapi, the Dugitan the Nachinga Marana Saki Genku, Pope Tendable, the local government, CSO, civil society, Burgarbangachi, Malo Pope, Chidi and Ani Tendola, the national minds of Tidu, and Senamen. Let's.
강에 마셔치 같이 중대서 와진 아니 선내 중나로 주미 차차기 잘라디 아니 자팀다 티디기베 제도가 맞제가 당아라기 안일로 때 예와치 체급도 세슈니 왜라 당아 저나 톰나기 냐땅 때 냠용 지자디베 쇼와진 대 디나로 담마디미디 가실레된 중대서 와진 따 지디딩아 저라 자툴레 주비기 때 디나로 고tip수임베 디나루 때 가야라 때 미베월레된 사마게비 셈디 슈치월레된 디기 타나 미세기 바나에 녀립치디기베 때 잘라나미 레셔두세 다네 보돌루 때 디좀 마수 테 아소바진 땡가처럼 미데날루 시데세 때 미세치기지루 자로 베디기베 동하 튕게세미디 때 뉴스베 조데세 다니디 때 가질루 라레 모세와진 것처럼 증종디 governance the local government nalu governance the kachi khache so chin ta sane juimbe ngachara zongkhatewa imbe tisu chala chikha lapthipti be majeba chin te mise kange di sesuba la khau tizumbe the community participation ne dongkha thensuba la khau la ta ane bodolu ngaja community participation di the lejumbe jogo proactiveness di lejumbe ongo bewa chin ta ane facilitation di tengachi sane junda zongkhatewa le thomdegi isai khatule the charo mazebajin the ani di nyusu jong session veila katishe.
I just want to put up this question to Gopal Giri. If every government comes on and then there is a reduction in tax, what will be there in our economic impact?
I think this is very important because you can think that the Minister of Finance is a Nangyam. Nangyam Natiru Mabachin, everybody will suffer. The fiscal space we call. They have a very limited money to spend in the economy, basically for the economic development purpose. Tax waiver, tax deferral, and all these is eat away the revenue base of the country. And if revenue base is not there, we will not be able to do the development activities. That is the immediate impact on the economy.
We have noticed that usually there's a disconnect between our educational institutions and our industries in Babala. So for instance, our business schools are not producing entrepreneurs, quite unfortunately, and our colleges may not then be feeding into the labor market. So what can Aurikesh, as an entrepreneur, what would you like to see in colleges that create that sort of connect, that sort of feeding in of talent? And I'd be happy if anyone else would like to give their inputs as well. Thank you.
I think you must be aware that the new curriculum for class 11 onwards, promoting entrepreneurship was launched about 2 years ago. So as part of really promoting the culture of entrepreneurship, entrepreneurs are usually invited to all the schools and colleges. Personally, for Green Road, my project has been enlisted as a module for RTC, CNR, and NRC as well, and so which is good. And then earlier, about 2 to 3 years ago, entrepreneurship was basically trying to employ yourself, get self-employed. But with the increasing number of graduates every year, entrepreneurs should be taken as a career choice. And I believe that the support from relevant stakeholders should come in. But it's a very funny thing, because you talk about entrepreneurship and really promoting and pushing youths. The funny thing is that last year the Ministry of Education procured some 4.6 million worth of sanitary pads for the schools. And this is going to happen after 2-3 days, 20th of this May. It's menstrual day. The funny thing is that the ministry didn't even buy a single Miltram worth from our local entrepreneurs. We do have JJ sanitary pad and Doriri supported by Loden and UNDP. And if they could have just procured, say 100,000 or 200,000 worth of sanitary pad, it would have made a big difference. So this is how we are, going about. You talk about, promoting entrepreneurship, but then we don't have this support that is coming from the government. And when I say government, it's not the ruling party; it is the bureaucrats. They tend to, follow these procurement policies, which is not going to help anyone. And the whole idea of economy is to support the needs of us human. It shouldn't be the other way around. And I think it's time that we have to reimagine, have a much bigger ambition of how we want to really develop, and probably have a different set of indicators on how you want to really quantify and then see where the country is heading. I hope I was able to answer you, Namge. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. You have, I think there's, okay, we'll leave that for the floor, and I see one or two, but there's one question here. Panelists, three recommendations, but one or two recommendations. If you can sum up your presentation into one or two recommendations, just short recommendations. These will all be listed and going to the government and to the authorities. Do you have any? If not, it's okay also, because this will continue.
Well, to everyone, I would say that, be curious. I feel like curiosity leads to success. So don't be complacent. Ask questions. I think if we start doing that, a lot of things will improve for sure. And to the government, I would say the same thing, that I think consultation. Thank you.
I've been requesting the government to have this relaxation on the procurement policies. Now, if you're not able to change fiscal incentives or GST or ECB, which of course is it's going to be a money bill, and then it'll take a lot of time to really bring about reviews and changes. But what if the government could actually relax on terms of procurement? This could really benefit our entrepreneurs. So that was one thing. And I have also submitted a very comprehensive framework on what the government should do. The funny thing is, again, is I've been trying to get hold of all the committee members of National Council for a presentation, and probably this is the 4th month that I'm still requesting. And I don't think it's going to happen until July, because probably from the 2nd June the summer session is going to happen, so they're going to be more occupied. But this is something that I will push for the sake of our entrepreneurs. And I think it's all about thriving and then really going forward, and no matter what kind of policies or regulations come in. So thank you.